Snoop Dogg denied his first-class seat. One call later, the whole crew's fired. Imagine this, first class isn't just about comfort, it's a power play. One man, who's built a career on resilience, finds himself face to face with pure entitlement at 30,000 feet. What happens next? No one saw it coming. The balance shifts, karma strikes, and privilege takes a nosedive. Snoop Dogg had just settled into his first-class seat, exhaling after a back-to-back grind of shows. The sunset outside painted the sky in warm hues, a rare peaceful moment he had earned through years of hard work. But peace? That's a luxury that doesn't last long when privilege steps in. Enter Elizabeth, tall, blonde, draped in designer labels, and radiating entitlement. She stops at Snoop's row, her manicured fingers tapping impatiently. "There must be a mistake," she says, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is obviously my seat." Snoop barely looks up. "Nah, this is 1A. Reserved it weeks ago." Elizabeth's smile is tight, forced. "I'm a gold tier member. I always get priority. You'd be more comfortable elsewhere." Snoop just stares. The audacity. He's been here before, on stage, in meetings, in moments where people questioned if he belonged. The flight attendant arrives, sensing the tension. "Is there a problem?" Elizabeth doesn't hesitate. "Yes, I need my seat back." The attendant glances at Snoop, hesitant. "Sir, can I check your ticket again?" Snoop hands it over, calm. The attendant scans it, then nods. "This is indeed your seat, Mr. Dogg." Elizabeth's mask slips for a second. That can't be right. He must have gotten a last-minute upgrade. Snoop leans back, eyes steady. "I suggest you take your assigned seat." This conversation is over. What happened next? Let's just say, one phone call later, the entire airline crew found themselves out of a job. If you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that like button, subscribe for more stories, and drop your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes the biggest revolutions start with just one seat. Snoop Dogg denied his first-class seat, but one call changed everything. Some battles aren't fought in the streets. Some happen 30,000 feet in the air, where power, privilege, and respect collide. Snoop Dogg was just looking for a quiet flight, but one entitled passenger had other plans. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Snoop leaned back in his first-class seat, flipping through his leather-bound notebook, jotting down ideas for his next big move. The hum of the engines, the faint scent of designer perfumes, the crisp bubbles of sparkling water, it was a moment of calm he had earned. But peace? That's a luxury that doesn't last when entitlement walks in. A commotion near the front of the cabin made him glance up. The doors had just opened for the last passengers to board, and in walked her, a platinum blonde woman moving with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. A designer tote swung from her companion's arm as she scanned the cabin with sharp, predatory eyes. Then, her gaze landed on Snoop. There it was. That look. That silent, unspoken question, "What are you doing here?" "Excuse me," she said, voice clipped as she flagged down a passing flight attendant. "There must be some kind of mistake. My seat is supposed to be here." The young flight attendant, fresh-faced and slightly nervous, offered a polite smile. "What seat number, ma'am?" 1A, her voice carried an air of finality. She gestured toward Snoop with a manicured hand, her finger a silent accusation. But clearly, there's been a mix-up. Snoop exhaled slowly. He already knew where this was going. The attendant checked his tablet and then smiled, apologetic, but firm. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but 1A is correctly assigned. Mr. Dogg booked it in advance." The woman's jaw tightened. "And what exactly am I supposed to do about that?" Her tone sharpened. "I'm a very loyal customer of this airline. A Platinum Elite member. Surely, you can make an exception." The attendant hesitated. "We can try to arrange something." "There's nothing to arrange," Snoop cut in, his voice calm but unyielding. He met her gaze without blinking. "This is my seat, and I intend to keep it." Silence. The air in the cabin turned thick, the kind of quiet tension where everyone pretends they're not listening but doesn't dare look away. The woman's lips curled into a condescending smile. "Well," she said, voice dripping with faux politeness, "I'm sure you'd be more comfortable in another seat. Perhaps in business class?" Snoop barely moved. Same game, different day. He'd been underestimated before with boardrooms, studios, corporate meetings where people smiled to his face but questioned his place. "I'm perfectly comfortable where I am," he replied evenly. The flight attendant, sensing the pressure, turned to Snoop. "Mr. Dogg, would you mind moving to another first-class seat? It would allow us to accommodate Mrs. Stokes." "Ah, so that was her name." Snoop leaned back, folded his arms, and let the weight of the moment settle. "I booked this seat for a reason," he said, voice cool but unwavering. "I won't be moving." Elizabeth, Mrs. Stokes, let out a sharp breath, clearly not used to hearing no. "Unbelievable," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for Snoop to hear. Then, turning back to the flight attendant, her tone switched, sweet, but laced with venom. "Do you even know who I am?" she asked, flashing an insincere smile. "I always fly first class. I don't think this is how you want to treat one of your most loyal customers." The attendant swallowed. He knew the game. He knew Elizabeth had connections. He also knew Snoop was in the right. But in this silent power struggle, his hesitation said everything. "I'll get the supervisor," he mumbled before retreating down the aisle. Elizabeth turned back to Snoop, eyes glinting. "You could have avoided all this, you know," she said, saccharine sweet but sharp as glass. "But I suppose some people just don't understand the meaning of compromise." Snoop tilted his head, studying her for a long moment. Then, with the faintest smirk, he echoed back her words. "Compromise?" His voice was quiet, deliberate. Interesting choice of words. What happened next? One phone call later, the entire airline crew learned a hard lesson about power, respect, and the consequences of entitlement. If you believe in standing your ground, hit that like button, subscribe for more real stories, and drop your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes the biggest revolutions start with just one seat. Snoop Dogg refuses to give up his first-class seat. What happens next shakes the entire flight crew. Some moments define who you are. Some remind the world exactly what respect looks like. Snoop Dogg wasn't looking for a fight, just a peaceful flight. But when entitlement met unshakable resolve, the balance of power in first class shifted in a way nobody saw coming. The tension in the cabin thickened as Elizabeth's forced smile flickered. She opened her mouth, ready to argue, but the sharp click, click, click of heels against the floor cut her off. The flight supervisor had arrived. A middle-aged woman in a crisp uniform, radiating authority, stopped beside them. Her gaze swept between Snoop and Elizabeth. "Is there a problem here?" Before anyone could answer, Elizabeth pounced. "Yes, there's a problem," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured frustration. "I'm supposed to be in seat 1A, but somehow, he ended up here." She practically spat the last word, waving a manicured hand toward Snoop like he was an obstacle, not a person. The supervisor's eyes flickered toward Snoop. For a split second, there was something there, recognition, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "Mr. Dogg," she said carefully, "would you be willing to move to another first-class seat? Just to resolve this quickly?" Snoop's fingers tightened around the armrest. He could feel the unspoken pressure hanging in the air. Be reasonable. Give in. Keep the peace. He looked at the supervisor. Then at Elizabeth. Then at the passengers around him, pretending not to listen, but soaking in every second. "No," he said simply. Elizabeth laughed, sharp, bitter. "Unbelievable," she scoffed, shaking her head. "You're really going to make a scene over this?" Snoop smiled faintly, his eyes like steel. Without another word, he pulled out his phone and began typing. Calm. Collected. unshaken. The tension doubled. The supervisor, Diane Lewis, shifted uncomfortably on her polished heels. As a veteran in the airline industry, she'd handled dozens of passenger disputes, but this was different. Elizabeth Stokes wasn't just another frustrated traveler. She was the kind of customer who believed that her money made her untouchable. Diane turned to Snoop. There was something about him, a quiet power that filled the space without him needing to raise his voice. "Mr. Dogg," she began cautiously, keeping her tone neutral. "I understand your position, but for the sake of resolving this quickly, would you reconsider moving to another seat? It's still first class, and..." "No." Snoop didn't even look up from his phone. His tone was calm. Final. Diane pressed her lips into a thin line, stealing a glance at Elizabeth, who was now pacing in small circles, arms crossed, seething. Elizabeth's voice sharpened. "I don't understand why this is even a discussion," she snapped. "He's being unreasonable. I'm a Platinum Elite member. Do you even know what that means?" The cabin went silent. Elizabeth's voice cut through the stillness like a knife. "I've spent more on this airline than he probably makes in a year. I deserve that seat." The words landed like a slap. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. Nobody spoke. Snoop finally looked up. His gaze locked onto Elizabeth's with a quiet intensity that made her pause mid-breath. "Mrs. Stokes," Snoop said, his voice smooth but unyielding. "Your membership status has nothing to do with me. I paid for this seat. Just like you paid for yours." He leaned back slightly. "If the airline made a mistake, that's their problem. Not mine." Elizabeth's cheeks flushed. Her polished confidence wavered. "This isn't about the money," she snapped. "It's about respect." Snoop arched an eyebrow. "Respect?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but it hit like a thunderclap. Even Diane stiffened at the weight of it. Elizabeth hesitated, scrambling to recover. I didn't mean it like that," she stammered. "I just meant, well, you're clearly not a frequent first-class flyer, and I..." "Stop." Snoop's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He wasn't angry. He didn't have to be. "You've said enough." Elizabeth's breath caught. For the first time, she had nothing to say. Diane took a steadying breath. The entire cabin was waiting for her response. The weight of it pressed down on her. She had been trained to de-escalate, to keep high-paying customers happy, to do whatever it took to keep the peace. But this wasn't a typical dispute. Snoop Dogg wasn't just another passenger. He was making a statement. And Diane knew better than to push this any further. "I'm afraid Mr. Dogg has the right to remain in his seat," she said at last, her voice measured. "He booked it, and we cannot force him to move." Elizabeth's face twisted in fury. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Because deep down, she knew it too. She had lost. What happened next? Let's just say, one phone call later, the entire airline crew learned a hard lesson about power, respect, and the cost of unchecked entitlement. If you believe in standing your ground, hit that like button, subscribe for more real stories, and drop your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes the biggest revolutions start with just one seat. Snoop Dogg refuses to give up his first-class seat. What happens next shocks the entire crew. Some people think money buys them everything: power, privilege, even the right to decide who belongs where. But today, Snoop Dogg wasn't backing down. "This is the kind of service I get after all the money I've spent on this airline?" Elizabeth's voice rang through the cabin, sharp and furious. Passengers winced at the sheer volume. "I'll be speaking to corporate about this, mark my words." Snoop didn't even look up from his phone. "You do that." His voice was cool, casual, unbothered. But Elizabeth? She wasn't done. She spun on her heel and stormed down the aisle, muttering under her breath about entitled people and incompetent staff. Diane Lewis, the flight supervisor, exhaled slowly. Maybe this was over, maybe they could move on. She was wrong. Moments later, Elizabeth was back. And this time, she wasn't alone. Flanking her was Gary, a young flight attendant who looked both nervous and trapped. Elizabeth had clearly decided she needed reinforcements. She refuses to cooperate. Elizabeth announced loudly, as if she were a queen addressing her subjects. She jabbed a manicured finger toward Snoop. I demand that you do something about this. Gary swallowed hard, glancing at Diane. This was getting out of control. Before anyone could respond, Snoop stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, commanding. The entire cabin held its breath. Without a word, Snoop pulled out his phone and pressed a button. The soft sound of a ringtone filled the air. Then, his voice was calm, sharp, deadly precise. Yeah, it's Snoop. I'm currently on one of your flights, and I'm having an issue with the staff. The color drained from Diane's face. Gary fidgeted. Elizabeth? She frowned, clearly confused. Snoop continued, voice steady as a knife slicing through tension. No, I'm not looking for compensation. I'm looking for accountability. Silence. Diane's pulse spiked. This wasn't just a disgruntled passenger. This was someone who knew exactly how to play the game. Snoop's next words hit like a sledgehammer. I'll expect a response before we take off. And if I don't get one, I'll assume this is a systemic issue and take it to the board. A beat of silence. Then, thank you. Snoop ended the call, slipped his phone back into his pocket, and turned to Diane with a faint smile. Now, he said, voice laced with quiet authority. Let's see how corporate handles this. Diane swallowed hard. The weight of the situation settled on her shoulders like a storm cloud. She didn't know the full extent of Snoop Dogg's influence, but one thing was clear, this was not a fight she wanted to lose. The flight crew's breaking point. The engines hummed softly. The first-class cabin was silent. Snoop, back in his seat. Calm. Unshaken. He flipped open his leather notebook, casually turning a page, as if the entire scene had already played out in his favor. Diane remained standing. Her usual confidence faltered. The words "ticket to the board" still echoed in her head. She had handled plenty of difficult passengers. But this was different. Elizabeth, however, wasn't done fighting. Her arms were crossed tightly, nails tapping against her sleeve. The smug look from before? Gone. Replaced by pure frustration. Then, she snapped. Are you just going to stand there and let this nonsense continue? Diane hesitated. One wrong move, and this would blow up even further. Gary? Frozen. Elizabeth? Fuming. Snoop? Still flipping pages, completely unbothered. Diane took a deep breath. She had a choice to make. Siding with Elizabeth meant risking the wrath of a man who could destroy the airline's reputation with a single phone call. Siding with Snoop meant angering a Platinum Elite member, someone the airline valued, or rather, feared. Finally, Diane spoke. Mrs. Stokes, she said carefully, I assure you, we are handling the situation. Please take your seat for now. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. Take my seat, she hissed. Take my seat? Her nostrils flared. Her face burned red. She jabbed a finger toward Snoop. I'm supposed to be in his seat. At that moment, Snoop turned a page in his notebook. The paper rustled softly. Elizabeth's tantrum? Less significant than the words on his page. She saw it. And it made her snap. Do you have any idea who I am? The words exploded from her mouth, her voice high and shrill. Snoop didn't react. Didn't flinch. Didn't look up. Nothing. That silence? Louder than her screaming. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Eyes darted down to books, phones, anything to avoid looking directly at the meltdown in progress. And then, Elizabeth played her final card. "I demand to speak to the captain." Diane's mask cracked. Calling the captain? That was a last resort. It would delay the flight. Cause a scene. And worse, it meant Elizabeth had officially lost control. Diane took a slow, steadying breath. She needed to end this. Before she could, Snoop finally spoke. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't look up. Just one simple sentence. "Good luck with that." Elizabeth froze. Passengers shifted. Diane exhaled. Because in that moment, everyone knew. This battle was over. And then, one phone call. One seat. One lesson learned the hard way. Corporate responded. And let's just say, Elizabeth Stokes wouldn't be flying Platinum Elite much longer. Snoop Dogg refuses to give up his first-class seat. The captain's final verdict shuts it down. Some people think status can buy them anything, including your seat. But when Snoop Dogg stood his ground, even the captain had to step in. What happened next? Nobody expected it. Elizabeth's last stand. "Mrs. Stokes," Diane said firmly, her voice measured. "Please understand, the captain's primary concern is the safety of the flight. This matter does not warrant his involvement. Let's resolve it here." But Elizabeth? She wasn't backing down. "Oh, I see how it is," she snapped. "You're protecting him because you think he's more important than me?" Her voice dripped with contempt, her anger flaring like a lit match. "Well, let me tell you something. If I'm not in that seat by the time this plane takes off, your airline will be hearing from my lawyers." The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. And that's when Snoop sighed. A soft, deliberate exhale. He reached forward and closed his notebook. The quiet thud as it shut felt louder than Elizabeth's shouting. He placed it on his lap, then looked up, directly at her. His expression? Calm. Unyielding. "Mrs. Stokes," Snoop said evenly. "If you truly believe your lawyers can resolve this, by all means, proceed." Elizabeth blinked. For the first time, she looked unsure. "What's that supposed to mean?" she snapped, but her voice wavered. Snoop leaned forward slightly. Not aggressive. Just controlled. "It means," he said, voice smooth but firm, "that throwing your weight around might work in some circles. But it won't work here. Not with me. And certainly not with the board members who will be reviewing this incident." He sat back. Expression neutral. But his eyes? Sharp. Unwavering. "So I suggest you take your seat before you embarrass yourself further." The cabin was silent. Diane's stomach twisted into knots. She glanced between them, feeling the tension like a live wire. Elizabeth's face? Red. Her jaw clenched so tightly, it looked like she was holding back a scream. Then, another voice cut through the silence. The captain steps in. "Ladies." A deep, authoritative voice. Heads turned. Even Elizabeth fell silent. Standing at the entrance of the first-class cabin was the captain himself. His uniform? Crisp. His presence? Commanding. He stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the scene. Practiced neutrality. Unshakable authority. What seems to be the problem here? Diane's pulse spiked. She stepped forward quickly, hoping to shut this down before it escalated even further. "Captain, we're handling a minor seating issue. There's no need for your involvement." But the captain? He wasn't having it. "I'll be the judge of that," he said, tone firm but calm. Then, he turned to Elizabeth. And just like that, she launched into another tirade. Her Platinum Elite status. Her loyalty to the airline. The injustice of being denied her rightful seat. The captain listened. Patiently. His expression? Unreadable. And when she finally ran out of breath, he turned to Snoop. His gaze softened, just slightly. "And you, sir?" the captain asked. "Do you have anything to add?" Snoop met his gaze. Didn't flinch. "No, Captain," he said simply. "I paid for this seat, and I intend to stay in it." His voice was calm. Final. "If the airline made a mistake with Miss Stokes's reservation, that's unfortunate. But it's not my responsibility to fix." The captain nodded. His eyes lingered on Snoop for a moment longer than necessary. Then, he turned back to Elizabeth and delivered the final verdict. "Mrs. Stokes," he said, voice firm, "I understand your frustration, but this seat was properly assigned to Mr. Dogg. I must ask you to return to your assigned seat so we can proceed with the flight." Elizabeth stared at him. Her mouth opened, then closed. No words came out, because in that moment, she knew. She had lost. What happened next? One phone call, one seat, one lesson learned the hard way. Elizabeth Stokes took her seat. And when the plane took off, Snoop Dogg, still sitting in 1A, still unshaken, still winning. Drop a comment below. If you believe in standing your ground, hit that like button, subscribe for more real stories, and tell us, what would you have done in this situation? Because sometimes, the biggest revolutions start with just one seat. Snoop Dogg stands his ground, the airline learns a hard lesson. Some people think status can get them anything, but when Snoop Dogg refused to be pushed around, the entire flight crew learned otherwise. Entitlement meets reality. Elizabeth Stokes, a Platinum Elite member, thought her status made her untouchable. When she demanded Snoop's first-class seat, the airline hesitated, but Snoop didn't. As the situation escalated, the captain intervened, shutting Elizabeth down. "If you refuse to take your seat, you will be removed from this flight." The cabin fell silent. Elizabeth searched for support, but found none. Meanwhile, Snoop calmly flipped open his notebook, unbothered. Realizing she had lost, Elizabeth stormed back to her seat, seething. But as she sat, her rage simmered. This wasn't over. Or so she thought. Corporate gets involved. Snoop made one call. The recipient? Marcus, a corporate board member. "The crew just tried to pressure me out of my seat," Snoop said, his tone calm but sharp. "Not just a request, an attempt to prioritize someone else over me." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Consider it handled." Minutes later, the cabin door opened. Two corporate representatives entered, scanning the first-class cabin. Their presence sent a wave of unease through the crew. They called Diane and Gary, the flight attendants involved, into the galley. Moments later, they were fired. Their stunned expressions said it all. Elizabeth, still fuming, turned to protest, but this time, no one cared. The final blow. As the plane prepared for takeoff, a corporate rep approached Snoop. "We sincerely apologize for how you were treated. The individuals involved have been removed." Snoop nodded. "Good. But this isn't just about me. I expect a full review. You have my word." Meanwhile, Elizabeth demanded answers. "What about me? I'm a Platinum Elite member." The rep's response was swift and brutal. "Your status has been revoked. Security will escort you off the plane." Her jaw dropped. "You can't do this," she screeched, but no one listened. Two security guards appeared. Moments later, Elizabeth was gone. A lesson in respect. As the plane finally took off, Snoop stared out the window, calm and victorious. Weeks later, the airline quietly announced new diversity training and stricter passenger policies. Though no names were mentioned, the message was clear. Respect isn't optional. And those who forget it will face the consequences. If you believe in standing your ground, hit like, subscribe, and share this story. Because sometimes one seat can change everything.